This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and the Aranda people. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
We all misbehave sometimes. Wanna change the world, indulge in some bad behavior.
Hello and welcome to Bad Behavior Podcast. I'm Rosalind.
And I'm Nicola.
Yay! Hi everybody. Nicola, how are you going? How is everything?
Oh, thank you for checking in, my dear friend. I'm going really good. I'm having a lovely Sunday. It's really sunny where I am. Really delightful. I'm sorry. I do feel bad saying that, but my vitamin D levels are so high that I'm on cloud 9 at the moment. So I've just been sitting outside reading all day, which has been really good. Books have been bringing me a lot of joy lately. I'm on a reading streak of, when you just read excellent book after excellent book. That's kind of where I'm at right now in my life. I'll give a couple of my recommendations right now while I'm on my little soapbox. So recent faves have included Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. It is so gay, so sexy, so good. I would definitely recommend that. Flames by Robbie Arnott, if you're into magic realism and beautiful Australiana scenery. That was an excellent one that I just read. And I also bought into all the TikTok goodness and read Red, White and Royal Blue, which is a gay novel that dreams are made of. And I would definitely recommend that as well. So lots of queerness, lots of fun, just living my best life. And I would ask you what books you're reading, but I know you mostly read Drarry fan fiction, which for those who don't know, it's Draco and Harry fanfics.
Oh my God. Airing out my dirty laundry. Okay, you know what? It's not even a guilty pleasure. I stand by it and you've let me loose now. I've got to tell the people why. So, okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Rosalind and I'm addicted to Drarry fanfiction. But the thing is, okay, let me start with this. Fanfiction is fantastic because you have all these amazing writers who are practicing their art, honing their craft, and they take these beautiful, amazing worlds. Let's just pretend J.K. Rowling is not linked to this. I love it, okay, because you have these amazing writers and they're taking these worlds and then they're putting their own spin on well-known characters you love. So you go into these worlds knowing the characters and they go, what if this random thing happened instead of that? What would happen to these characters? How do we stay true to the characters but live it out in a completely different way? I love that. My favorite thing in the world is anti-heroes and redemption and figuring out why people believe things and why they change. I'm obsessed with cults. And so Drarry is so beautiful to me because you have a character that is known for sort of innate goodness, but really struggles with that because really he's just a jock who's been thrown into and kind of manipulated and bred for dying for everybody and being a bit of a Jesus. That's fucked up. And then you've got Draco, who's like basically been brainwashed into an allegory for racism, like pure-bloodedness, who then has to grow and change and learn that he's wrong and that everything he's ever based any of his beliefs on is flawed and has to come to terms with the horrible things that he's done and his family has done and his legacy in life. And then you see that interaction. That is fascinating to me.
It's pulling at my smut meter for all like the enemies to lovers content. I don't think you should be ashamed of reading the amount of Drarry.
I'm not ashamed, as evidenced by the fact we're putting this on the internet.
Because Rosalind will literally read like novels worth of Drarry on a week-to-week basis. Like it is
I'll be honest, if you're looking to enter into that, be careful. Check the warnings, check the ratings. If you're not looking for smut, it may find you. So just be careful out there.
I have been asking you to send me one of your favorites for so long. Like, I want to dip my toe in the Drarry field.
I'm so nervous to send you one because I love them so much that I feel. And also some of the ones that I want to send you are very character study ones rather than really raunchy ones. And I feel like you just want raunchy.
I do want raunchy. I've been getting really into romance books lately. Like, they have been my jam, and I've always loved reading. I've always read a lot, and I never really, like, I did that classic thing that I feel like a lot of young girls do, where they start to read things based on, like, proving their intelligence instead of actually wanting to read that. So for years I would read these like really dry, boring books, and I feel like recently I've just gotten back into like the romance genre, the thriller genre, like all this stuff that is purely for my enjoyment, and it is, oh, it's so satisfying. Like, there is nothing more brilliant to me than the feeling of when you are hungrily consuming a book and you cannot put it down. It is so satisfying. And if Drarry gives you that, then Drarry gives you that, you know?
Well, here's the thing too. I grew up loving science fiction and fantasy novels. Probably one of my favorite novels is Dune. And I mean, highly problematic book now. There's a lot of sort of stuff in there that I don't agree with. But I love that book. And I loved fantasy novels that were all like, it's set in medieval times, so we can't write strong women because it's medieval, but dragons and magic is fine. You know, it was back when I was first discovering those books, it was not queer, or at least the ones that were queer, like it was few and far between. And the female characters were not like kick-ass characters all the time. There was a lot of kind of, you know, the woman is the prize at the end kind of novels. And so fan fiction is this amazing community of people who are exploring queer identities and putting it forward as, you know, the reason you're here is for the world and the characters. Their identity, their sexuality, that's almost a secondary thing that we're adding as cushioning or as something to talk about or to explore, but it's not the turning point of the novel almost. It's like, it's just an addition to it. And I love that because I got so frustrated growing up with not having books that I really related to. I wanted strong female characters and I wanted way more representation. I wanted trans characters. I wanted queer characters of every, you know, color, creed, religion, everything. And it wasn't just like the story of coming out and having a homophobic reaction.
And being ostracized for that. Yeah.
That was the only story that there was. And I was like, but that wasn't necessarily my experience. And so I'm not interested in reading that over and over. I want a coming of age story where being gay doesn't matter. Can we have that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, queer literature and queer books, like I mostly read books that have queer relationships in them, and it is, you know, a point of power too, to be able to, like, the things that I'm consuming and the characters that I'm reading about, like, they reflect me and they reflect my community as well, and it's taking up space in a way that's really powerful. So I completely agree with that. I think reading novels with really incredible queer characters is some of the best healing work that you can do as a queer person. It just feels so beautiful and satisfying.
And it's getting better too. I really think that there's been so much like published recently. Really, the last 10 years I've seen a big upshoot, and I'm so excited by that. And in fact, today we are talking to an author who has recently released a book called Nothing But My Body. We're talking to Tilly Lawless, who is an amazing queer woman, a sex worker, a writer, a fantastic writer at that. And I'm so excited to dive into this novel and some of the themes and to chat to her about that.
So my name's Tilly Lawless and I'm a full service sex worker. I've been doing sex work for over 8 years now, mainly in Sydney, and I live in Sydney. I also have done a fair bit of activism, I suppose it would be called, around like sex worker rights and some other issues, and I'm also a writer.
So you wrote a book called Nothing But My Body, which is going to be released on August 3rd. And we got sent an advance copy to read, and it was absolutely wonderful. The book feels very intimate. It is a sort of, it's auto-literary fiction, is that right? That's the...
I mean, to be honest, like I was referring to it as semi-autobiographical fiction, but apparently that's kind of like an outdated term now. And when I took it to an agent and then it went to publishers, like they were all referring to it as both autofiction and literary fiction, neither of which terms I'd ever heard before. So I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about that, but it is drawn upon my life, and a lot of it is based on my life. But for me, it's not nonfiction because not all of it's true, you know? And the things that are true are often put together in different timelines and collated in different ways. And like the characters are amalgamations of various people and not any one person. And so it isn't, as much as it's drawn from reality, it's not a real story, you know? Yeah.
So the narrator is never named. Do you think that you're sort of the narrator, but the experiences that you go through are reflections rather than actually true recollection? It's more like this sort of thing happened?
Well, I mean,
someone who's sort of me.
Well, I didn't name her because I felt I wanted the reader to be completely immersed in her thoughts and feel like they were her in that moment. And so the reason I didn't give a name was because I felt having a name would make you realize that you weren't in your own mind, you know? And in not naming her, I realized maybe I made a mistake, because the fact that I didn't name her means people assume it was me, you know?
Yeah.
But for me, I never saw myself as the narrator. Like, she's some things she thinks are not things I think. Like, well, some points of I don't know. Like, I was still setting myself inside like someone else's mind. But yeah, so I don't see myself as a narrator. But yeah, she was just mainly unnamed as sort of a technical device that maybe hasn't quite worked.
No, when you say because it makes it feel like you, I definitely resonate with that. I feel like the fact that they didn't have a name meant I was a lot more immersed in it. I think it worked.
Oh, amazing. Okay, great. Thank you.
And then the only name we had was Maddie, which was her sex worker name.
Yeah. Yeah, and work names are all just, I mean, obviously they're all fake anyway, so I didn't feel like that disrupted anything.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What were some of the themes that you were most excited to cover when you started writing? Were there a few things that you were like, I want this point to come across?
Yeah, well, so when I set out writing it, what I intended to do was to show the fluctuations of mental health and the way in which I think often we look at mental health as something that's like linear, like you're bad and then you're like, your mental health is bad and then you're sort of like going through this progression of getting it better, you know? Whereas in reality, it's something that goes up and down. And I also don't think, I think sometimes we need to stop striving. Like, I know for a long time I looked at my mental health as something that needed to be fixed, and it was like a really important learning curve for me to be like, this isn't something that I can completely fix. Like, it's only something that I can learn to like live with, and also like take the good when it comes and realize that when the bad comes, it won't be forever. So that was what I was intending in writing it, was just, and also to show the way in which like when things are happening around you, it impacts like the way in which you think and like the pace of your thoughts and stuff. So that was the overall intent. And then another thing that was really important to me was I wanted to deal with sex work in a way that didn't make sex work the complete focus of the book. like I wanted sex work to be the backdrop of the book in the same way that like Sydney is the backdrop of the book, or like Berlin, or like the other locations. Like I wanted it to be part of the atmosphere but not be the obsession, because I think so much of, you know, media that deals with sex work, it's like very othering, and it was also just like obsessed with the kind of like facts around sex work. And like I wanted to show that you could use sex work as one layer of something, but still encompass like many other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that I really resonate with when I read books that do that with queerness or being
Yes.
gay. They're like, this is
Yeah.
just one facet rather than your entire character, which
Fully.
unfortunately a lot of media does. So it makes total sense that they would do the same for sex work.
Yeah, it always has to be the problem topic.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be the problem topic. Like, it just is, you know?
It just is. Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. The book touches on friendship and long distance connections during COVID. People have obviously been very isolated throughout this pandemic now.
Yeah, again,
Melbourne's
yeah.
back in lockdown, so Sydney. How did that affect you through your writing process, just that isolation?
Oh, definitely I mean, I love my friends anyway. Like I'm always pretty open about how important friendships are to me, and I'm not like shy about like expressing my feelings for my friends. But definitely I missed so many friends so acutely in lockdown that really bled into the writing that I was doing. Which is why I like finish like at the end, like I say something like this is a love letter to friendship, because to me the whole experience of writing the book and like thinking about like processing my feelings about things through the character that I was writing, what I ultimately came down to at the end of it was that just like I love my friends and I'm so grateful for them. And like that probably sounds like pretty like naff or trite or something, but like yeah, ultimately, like I think one of the few things we have in this world is connection, and I've been really lucky to connect with a lot of people in like the form of friendships. So yeah, definitely being alone and missing them influenced it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been interesting, hasn't it, with COVID? It's like all of these connections you have. Everyone talks about sort of the economic problems of COVID, and then you realize that the social problems are so hard to navigate individually. Like
Totally.
people who haven't
And,
seen
like,
their families, friends. It's
Yeah. And I think also like in the lockdown last year, a lot of us became hyper aware of, you know, because obviously digital and online spaces are important, but I think a lot of us became really aware of the importance of physical spaces and how online spaces can't actually replicate that and never will. And especially I think in queer spaces, that became really pertinent to me and a lot of like queer friends. And so that was like another thing I wanted to celebrate in writing it was, you know, these queer spaces, which is why I speak a lot about like, you know, clubbing or whatever, because like clubs traditionally have been a place where queer people have gathered. So yeah, it was definitely a mourning of what couldn't happen in that time.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your personal story as well outside of the book, because the book does explore, as you said, sort of importance of community and queer spaces and friendships. And I'd love if you could speak a bit on how you've personally been affected by having a LGBTIQA plus community and why it's important.
Look, I'm not close with my extended family. I never have been. I'm completely estranged from one side of my family, including my mum. I haven't spoken to her in over a decade. And so for me, I think I really did. And then the other side of my family, a lot of them are quite Christian, don't like the fact I'm gay, definitely don't like the fact I'm a sex worker. I've had a lot of conflict with them as well. So for me, I definitely found a solace and community in the queer community in Sydney, like a support network that I didn't have in family. Yeah, I honestly feel like that's what it comes down to. Like, actually, I mean, but I'm sure there are people with like completely functional relationships with extended family who still find the community around them really important. I think also it's been because I didn't have that connection to my extended family, a lot of, you know, in having an extended family that you're close to, people often have a lot of really important intergenerational relationships. And I didn't really have that. And I found the straight community doesn't really socialize so intergenerationally. You know what I mean? Like my straight friends tend to mix more with people their own age. And I think the thing I really liked about the queer community was the fact that I was mixing with a lot of people who were older than me. Yeah. And they kind of provided the maybe like modeling. I don't want to say role models because like I don't really like the idea of modeling yourself of anyone else's behavior. But they provided maybe like a mentorship that I didn't have otherwise. Yeah, I think the intergenerational thing of the queer community is something that I really, really treasure, and I definitely was lacking in my personal life, like in terms of family.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I never thought of that before, but that's completely true. The intergenerational.
You know, like yeah. Well, like when you don't speak to your aunts or uncles, or like, you know, as I said, I don't speak to my mum. Like, there were people of my aunts and uncles and mum's age group that I became friends with. You know, and I think that's also, to be honest, why I became, why I've also really enjoyed like brothel work and massage parlor work, is also because of like the intergenerationalness of it, you know? Like I was often working with like a lot of women older than me, and they're the ones who I tended to become really close with.
I loved the answer that Tilly gave me when I asked her about the LGBTIQA plus community and how it affected her. I hadn't ever thought about multi-generational friendships and how important that is for people. And it was just a really beautiful answer, I think, and framed it really well for me. I think that the LGBT plus community is a phrase that we throw around a lot. And we go, how important is it to have that community behind you? And yet that's such a personal question. And it means something completely different to every person that you throw it to. And there's this assumption that every queer person has one, and an assumption that every queer person has one that is tolerant and accepting and open and warm and loving. And that's not necessarily true for every person on this planet who identifies as queer. Absolutely not. But it's got me reflecting on my own journey to self-acceptance and, you know, being a young person who was queer growing up, and what it was like to discover those communities and those pockets of people, and how important the LGBT community was for me personally. So I was thinking about that and reflecting on my youth. Yeah, I wanted to know if you have any stories like that of times when it was, you know, really impactful to have, like, what LGBT community means to you, basically.
That's such a big question. I really love that question too, because I think it's you know, one of my favourite things to talk about is reflecting on friendship and the different friends that you have, and like the ways that you've been able to have relationships with different people. And I think for me, a lot of my really close friends are queer, and it's that community has come quite naturally. Like I don't, in my... You know, I have a couple of memories of being in spaces where I haven't felt super welcome in my queer identity, of course, but for the most part, it's, I think for me, it truly kind of blossomed when I moved over to New York City for college. Like that, I just remember there being so many queer people, so many non-binary people, so many trans people. Everyone was like kind of coming into themselves, being away from like the places that they grew up in, and everyone was super keen to connect and make friends as well. So it was just like this really supercharged type of experience where people were open, and of course there was like lots of drugs and alcohol too, which always helps when you're making friends and you're young and nervous. So yeah, I think you know, where I sit now, like, I'm so grateful for all my queer friends. And I mean, you're a big part of that. Like, can we just mention that for Roz and I, like, we went to, I mean, I'm sure people are sick of hearing our origin story at this point, but we were in middle school together, and we never really, I remember one of the first, like, vaguely queer thing that we used to do is we used to be, well, we still are, we're obsessed with gay cinema. Like, I remember going over to Roz's house and we'd, like, watch all these gay movies together, and we just loved them, and we still have our favourites now.
Not a lot of self-awareness about why we love them necessarily.
And I don't even remember there being, like, I don't know how we got to that point where we were both like, oh, you like films with gay people in it? Oh, so do I. I just remember, like, most of my, you know, later years of my teens were spent at your house, like, upstairs in front of the TV watching, like, all these different gay films and, like, being so enchanted by them. And I mean, that's a community in itself, isn't it? Like, us two just going about the world with our little friendship, because you are such a huge part of my journey as a queer woman. It's so interchangeable to me. I can't separate the two of them, you know?
Absolutely. No, I think having a best friend when you're that age who is also queer is very, very helpful. I think about, I mean, imagine that you were straight. I think it would be a lot harder for me to have talked through all of those things and felt like you really understood them. Even if you had been empathetic and open, it's different when you feel that you're experiencing the same thing. But it's interesting because I think you were one of the people who, I mean, you were my queer community for a long time, and I felt very disconnected from the idea of an LGBT community right up through uni, I think. Obviously, I had friends who were queer, but I didn't feel like it was, you know, this sort of little queer community I was a part of that I was connected to and that I felt super accepted in. I very much felt like a lot of my friends at university were straight, and I didn't feel like I was, I don't even know how to put it, almost like I wasn't a performing queer, if that makes sense. Like, I wasn't actively, openly queer in a lot of spaces because I didn't actively come out all the time, and because I wasn't in a queer space, if I didn't actively come out, I was perceived as straight. And so I really did feel very disconnected from that, and it took me discovering the queer side of YouTube. That was really helpful. That was definitely a community for me because it was people talking about things I questioned and experimenting with ideas and concepts that made me feel normal and a part of, you know, a world that had lots of different identities, and that was exciting rather than scary. And more recently, and I will mention it again, and I know you'll laugh, Nikki, but TikTok is really great for that too. I think that there's been a lot of conversations recently about how toxic it can be, and I think that's very true. Any social media has the propensity to go down that line, especially with things like diet culture and things like that. But in terms of the queer community, I'm very firmly on gay TikTok, and there is a lot of love and acceptance, and the ideas that I've come across on that platform, you know, I've come across people who I never would have in any other social media platform in a way, you know.
It's so accessible.
And that's been really wonderful.
I think the idea of queerness online is so interesting. Like, I don't think I've ever, my relationship with a lot of online platforms is, like, super fraught, and I, you know, don't feel very, I don't feel super excited about existing in those spaces very often. Like, it's very rare that I would go onto Instagram or TikTok and be like, yes, this is what I need right now, you know. Like, it's more like a mindless thing that I do. But I can, you know, for me, this is we always speak about like representation and what you consume, and like even with when we were talking about books at the beginning of this episode, like it is pretty powerful to be able to like curate that in those spaces and like really be intentional about like making sure you're seeing queer love and making sure you're seeing queer art and like, you know, different, you know, trans love and different people in different bodies and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's even if you didn't ever feel like you had that community in person, the fact that you've been able to, you know, have it online is really special.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point when you think about people who, you know, queer people who are not in safe spaces. So if they are living in countries where it is illegal, or they are living in a conservative family, or, you know, a religious family where it's not acceptable, if they're living somewhere where they have a threat of violence, of, you know, gay conversion, which we've talked about on this podcast before, many different things, or even just a situation where they have no sort of queer people around them at all, and so it's just isolated. Even if they're being accepted by their family, isolation in that way can be extremely difficult, and very lonely and very hard to come to terms with. And so being online and having online spaces, you know, it's sort of what Tilly was saying. She was living in a rural area, and that was really a saving grace for her, and I think it is for a lot of people. It's very accessible. As soon as you have an internet connection, you will probably be able to find queer forums, YouTubers, whatever it is, and that can be really important. And I think that's really beautiful and wonderful, but also obviously stay safe in places where censorship is still paramount. But yeah, no, I don't know. I just think this is such a fascinating idea. I don't think we examine the concept of the LGBT community very much. In media, it's just a phrase that you use to denote every single queer person on the planet. And in stories, we sort of go, you know, people have queer friends and a community, and they're accepted because they're confident, and so they must. And I don't think it's a given always. And I think, yeah, it's nice to think about and reflect on. If any listeners are out there who don't feel like they have a community yet and they're still searching for one, I'd love it if you reached out to us. I'm really happy to chat. Also, I'm sure we'll put some resources for different places you can go on our show notes. And if you also have reflections of the LGBT community and ways it's helped you, or how you found it, or if you have anything unusual that happened, I'd also love to hear that. So please email us at info@badbehaviorpodcast.com or shoot us a DM on Instagram. I would love to know.
I just want to say quickly too, I think the feeling of really craving that in your life but not knowing where to start, or not feeling like it's ever possible for you, like, is so, and Roz and I would have so many conversations about this. We still do, like, we still dream of our lesbian girl gang.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still on various journeys, and it's important for me to have people who are willing to sit in uncertainty with me, but, you know, I'm still looking for new friends all the time and all of that. Like, I'm still in that place sometimes, especially with lockdown. Oh my God, it's hugely, literally isolating because you have to isolate. So
yeah, well, DM us if you want.
It's not an easy time to be building a community. I'll give you that.
Send us a DM if you want to be Roz's friend, guys. Like, please.
Oh my God, that makes me sound so desperate. I promise I have friends.
I can vouch for her. She's really nice. She's such a lovely girl. But yeah, just would
Oh my God. Yeah, message Nicola on
appreciate
Instagram for a detailed
would appreciate some people
recommendation.
to share the emotional load, if you know what I mean.
Wow.
Kidding.
Wow.
That was so mean.
Well, Nicola's going to need a new friend after she loses me with comments like
Okay,
this.
so DM me to be my friend is now the conclusion that we're ending with. And on that note, let's go back to Tilly for more of her wonderful wisdoms. Did you know that the average person uses over 11,000 menstrual disposable products in their lifetime? And it's estimated that over 100 billion menstrual disposables end up in landfill annually. That's why we are so excited to collaborate with Modibody, the new way to period. I personally love Modibody products and I'm so excited to work with them. Modibody products help me feel my best when I'm on my period, and I highly recommend them to anyone looking to explore a more sustainable and comfortable way to have your period. They are also committed to creating a positive impact as a brand. This includes helping to end period poverty and supporting health education programs that normalise and open up conversations around our bodies, which is something we're also trying to do here on Bad Behaviour. Check out modibody.com for more details. Modibody is the new way to period.
We've talked before on this podcast about growing up queer in kind of conservative areas. Both my co-hosts and I did.
Oh, where are you from?
We're from Geelong, but at the time it was a little bit more conservative than it is now.
Yeah, totally.
Certainly. So, yeah, I'd love if you could speak on what it's like growing up queer in sort of a rural area.
I mean, same as the area you're from, my Bellingen now is like so much more accepting of that stuff. But when I grew up in Bellingen and I went to school in Coffs, and Coffs definitely is, at the time, was hugely homophobic and still is fairly homophobic. There was one lesbian in the whole town. You know what I mean? Like, it was like everyone knew who that woman was.
The lesbian.
Yeah, the lesbian. This like middle-aged, like butch lesbian.
Yeah.
And that was her. Yeah, that was the lesbian. Yeah.
Capital L.
Yeah, fully. And it was just so isolating, you know? Like, I also lived 15 k's out of town on a property and there was no public transport. You know, it wasn't like we had trains or like buses. There was the one school bus that only went on school days, you know? So I was also isolated, not just in terms of being queer, but just isolated from other people my age. You know, like if I wanted to hang out with someone, I had to walk 3 k's to a friend's house. And so for me, the internet very much became my refuge at that age. Like I was, you know, on Tumblr and DeviantArt and Post Secret Forum and always on Omegle, and basically like a lot of my early sexual experiences were online, you know? Like the first time I had any sexual experience really was like having cyber online as like a 12-year-old. So, and it was actually, it was on a horse role play forum. So I was role playing as a horse, but I was a gay male horse. And this other girl who was 16 was also role playing as a gay male horse. And we had gay male anal sex as horses. And that was my first kind of properly sexual experience. So like, I don't know, for me, I guess I kind of, you know, speaking about the importance of like physical and online spaces, like for me, obviously online spaces was so vital as a teenager because it was all I had in terms of queer community. And then getting to Sydney, I finally had these physical spaces. And that's why I don't want to like say that like, I personally prefer physical spaces. Like, you know, I don't use online queer spaces so much now that I do have physical ones. But in the absence of physical ones, those online ones are just like, I mean, in some ways I have a relationship with the internet that I feel like a lot of my friends who grew up in city areas don't have. Well, especially like straight friends who grew up in like metropolitan areas don't have, because like they could just go hang out with friends. And so I do like that I was immersed in kind of like a little bit of like an underside of internet culture before the internet kind of got ruined by you know, corporations and censorship, which is like currently happening, you know? Like I was like in all those places where they said teenagers shouldn't go because they'd be talking to older people, you know? And I really value those experiences.
How did you first get into or discover sex work? What drew you to it?
So I moved to Sydney when I was 19 and was going to uni and was on, like I was living out of home, so I was on, whatever you call it, what's it called? Oz Study, Centrelink for students.
Yeah.
But it was only just enough to cover my rent. I got by the first year by like a little bit of babysitting, cash in hand, and like working at a bar, cash in hand. And then I was like, I need something that's more financially lucrative. And so I was like, sex work or drug dealing, because they were the two things that, kind of stereotypically came to mind as things that are meant to be financially lucrative. And I was like, oh, I don't think I'll be a good drug dealer. I'm not very discreet. So I spoke to a friend of mine and was like, I've been thinking of starting sex work. And she was like, me too. Except I probably called it prostitution then. I can't remember. And then we just Googled it and we started an escort agency together when I was 20. Yeah. So it was very much out of financial need and, to be honest, a lot of naivety. Like I thought sex work was illegal at the time. I had no idea of anything. Like, if I had any, rights or like, where was the best place to work or what was the best kind of sex work to do. I just went straight into escorting at a escort agency, and the first client I slept with was only the second man I'd ever fucked, and I told him that and he didn't believe me. He thought it was a sales pitch. And so then I've just gone with it from there. But like I was only with an escort agency for 2 months, and then I went into massage parlor work, and then full service massage parlor work, and then brothels, and then private escorting, and then I've done all sorts of different things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was a line in your book that really fascinated me, and I'd love if you could tell me if you feel the same as your narrator.
Oh yeah.
It was sexual attraction does not equal sexual compatibility, because I think personally as a queer person that was really fascinating to me, because I was like, oh, that feels very true.
That line actually doesn't come from me. A friend said it to me years ago, and I can't even remember which friend it was, otherwise I would credit them, but it was in conversation and we were talking about something and they said that, and I was like, wow, that is so simple and so true.
Great.
Yeah, so
you had the same reaction I had.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh my god, it was just like put so simply, like so true. Like so often the time where I'm really, really, really attracted to someone in my personal life, and then we end up having sex and there's just like no vibe, and and that's the shocking thing with clients is often I'm repulsed and then we do have good sex. Like unfortunately, oh god, if sexual attraction like equaled sexual compatibility, every time you had sex it would be a sure thing, like you would know that it was going to be good sex based on being attracted to the person, but it's not like that at all. So someone said that to me many, many years ago, and I wish I could remember who it was.
No, I feel like I need it on a t-shirt or something. I'd like to talk a little bit. I saw your TED talk, and you mentioned that you have done some activism around sex work before. So I'd love to ask what some assumptions people have about sex work.
Oh God, so many assumptions. People assume that you are a drug addict, or that you've been abused as a child, or that you're a nymphomaniac, or that you're like incapable of having like genuine connections with people. Or on the other side, you also have people assuming that you're making huge amounts of money that you're maybe not. Yeah, there are so many. Or that, you're a great businesswoman or something, which I'm definitely not. Like there are good and bad assumptions about sex workers. Like, I mean, the reality is that sex workers, like people on any other job, are completely different. We're all individuals, and there's not a certain kind of person that becomes a sex worker. Like it's generally like economic need or like circumstance or whatever that gets people into sex work. You can't actually make any assumptions about someone in the industry because it doesn't attract certain kinds of people.
Yeah, we've come across this a lot. We've talked about, in previous episodes, we've done fat phobia and addiction and mental health, and there are stigmas around all of those different topics. And every time we come back to it, it's just so dehumanizing. So people just go, this is a stereotype and they're not people. And then as soon as you put the human element back in, you go, oh, well, those assumptions weren't real because we forgot that they were people.
Totally, exactly.
If you could say sort of to the people who are out there who don't know a lot about sex work, or maybe are only just realizing that they have a lot of assumptions and stigma around it, is there something that you would say or want to say to those people?
Realizing that you have assumptions that aren't necessarily true is often what sets the ball rolling to undoing those assumptions. But I guess same as with any marginalized people that people have stereotypes about, I would say just like actually listen to sex workers and consume the culture that we create. Yeah, I think it's really as simple as that in terms of undoing assumptions. Because as you said, once you realize that people are people rather than stereotypes, it kind of does away with all that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have one more question. And
oh, yeah, that went so
I know how to
fast.
answer this because I loved your book.
Yeah,
but my question is, why should people read Nothing But My Body?
Oh,
I'm putting you on the spot. You have to...
I don't think people should do anything. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, from a political perspective, like, I like that I've written a book about sex work that doesn't fall into the genre that sex work is put in again and again, which is memoir. So I do like that I've done a novel that deals with sex work. And that kind of sets it apart from like some other things. So that might be something that's compelling for people to read. But I don't see why there's any reason why anyone should do anything. You know? Like, if you're a reader and you like to read, like, you're welcome to read it. Like, even if you're not a reader, you might enjoy it because maybe it's salacious enough. But I'm just grateful if people read it and like it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Bad Behavior. It was fantastic to have you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys being here. And also wanted to let you all know that we got nominated for a Frankie Good Stuff Award.
Yay!
So, which is so exciting. I have adored Frankie my whole life, so this is a dream come true.
And in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you guys. So you can find us on Instagram at Bad Behavior Podcast, on Twitter at Bad Behavior Cast, or email us on badbehaviorpodcast.com.
Thank you to the lovely Tilly for spending time to chat to us.
Thank you for Nicola for chatting to me.
And we would really recommend her book. Please
You're not
go
gonna
buy
thank
it.
me?
Oh, thank you to you too.
Thank you to Cheji for editing.
Oh my God, this is
Well, you
terrible.
started the thank yous. We've got to thank everybody.
I was just trying to thank our guest.
Nothing But My Body, Tilly Lawless. Exceptional.
It's a good one. Bye.
The executive producer for this episode was Rosalind Anketel. Bad Behavior is produced by Rosalind Anketel, Nicola Cranage, and Namcheja Magembe. Hosted by Rosalind Anketel and Nicola Cranage. Editing and sound design by Namcheja Magembe. Our logo was designed by Bonnie Eichelberger.
We all misbehave sometimes. Wanna change the world, indulge in some bad behavior.